I am grateful for the opportunity to speak with you all today, to have been invited to share some reflections and thoughts on one of Dr. King's most well-known quotations. I think we all know how it goes, but that quote is, "We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now." And in his speech, he continued on, "In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with a lost opportunity. The tide in the affairs of men does not remain at the flood, it ebbs. We may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage, but time is deaf to every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residue of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, too late. There is an invisible book of life that faithfully records our vigilance or our neglect." These words, like so many of Dr. King's, continue to be resonant and often quoted. And as I speak here today, I want to begin by saying, I do not presume to be an expert on Dr. King's legacy or the civil rights era. I do not presume to provide thoughts on an era that so many people on this call lived firsthand. I do not presume how these words should impact you or the way you view the fierce urgency of now. But I will simply reflect on the two lessons I take from this quote, and importantly, the larger speech which Dr. King gave on April 4th, 1967. The first of these two lessons relates to the actual context of his speech. Dr. King was speaking about the Vietnam War. He was speaking critically of the reality that American men were going to a far-off land, fighting for democracy, equality, and the ideals that we as a nation had not yet realized at home. He reflected on the reality that men of all races were fighting side by side, but upon their return to the United States, were not rarely working, living, or existing side by side. As a legislator, as a representative of diverse and engaged communities, and as a member of Congress, the context of this speech matters to me, because even in discussing this notion of the fierce urgency of now, it's important for me to remember and consider that while often remembered for this most famous sentence, Dr. King was challenging and questioning the war. He was relating a foreign war to its impact and its relevance on the struggle for civil rights, on equality, and on the struggle for justice here at home. He was challenging his listeners to think critically of the war, of our foreign policy, of our pursuits through a different lens. And whether one agreed with him or not, the lens he brought to his critique and his challenge of the war was one that brought listeners to consider not just the war, but indeed to view it through a larger lens of our own domestic policy. And as a legislator, I view the context of this speech to be interesting. He was challenging policy, which from my understanding was not an entirely unique critique of the time, but he was doing so through the lens of justice and in reflection of what comes next. What comes next when these men return home from war or when they don't? What's the impact on his life's work, the cause of justice and the pursuit of equality? This is the first of the reflections on this speech, and a reflection that as a legislator, the lesson for me is to consider how my choices, be they related to foreign policy, healthcare policy, infrastructure policy, education policy, the list goes on, how are these choices related to the impact that they may have on the cause of justice and racial equity here at home? The call to all of us is really to consider how all of our challenges and our successes in our communities and in Fredericksburg impact the pursuit of a beloved community. And frankly, this is the work of the Fredericksburg NAACP and the NAACP nationwide. The second lesson of this speech is reflecting on what the fierce urgency of now means and can mean. On Capitol Hill these days, there is a certain urgency. We're still recovering from a once-in-a-generation pandemic. We're still grappling with supply chain issues, inflation, concerns about shortages at the grocery store, and high costs at the pharmacy. We're still grappling with lingering questions of justice, equality, and equal opportunity, many of which are the same questions that Dr. King was addressing during his lifetime. And for many lawmakers in the past, it might have been possible to just kick the can down the road on some of these issues, to procrastinate and let the long passage of time sort it out. But as Dr. King said, we are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. And frankly, that's a sentiment that elected officials, public servants, and anyone serving our community should embrace. It's a philosophy that connects with how I see progress and justice advancing in our communities, our Commonwealth, and our country. And frankly, as Dr. Sims was reflecting on her work and the movement of that auction block, it could have been possible for the city to just leave it where it was, let the future sort it out. It could have been possible for them to say at a future time, somebody else will take care of it. Let others deal with the challenge, the hurt, the emotions, the history. But the community took action in the here and now. The community recognized that now is the urgent time to contend with this change, this confrontation with history, and this decision to move forward. So I thank her for sharing that story and how importantly it relates to the theme of today. In the last few weeks, I've been proud to see steps forward on some of the pressing issues of today, issues that impact all communities, but issues that certainly have a tremendous impact on the cause of justice and equality. One particular issue is the issue of addiction, the way it can tear families apart, push people into the criminal justice system, and destroy futures. Last month, President Biden signed into law my legislation to strengthen our communities and provide support in our fight against the addiction crisis. Our law, the bill that I worked on, addresses the skyrocketing rates of overdose and overdose deaths that we are seeing here in Virginia, and it provides opportunities for immediate treatment and support for longer-term recovery. Among its many provisions, this law supports transitioning those suffering from substance use disorders away from jail and towards mental health and substance use disorder programs. In this way, we will reduce recidivism and provide stronger pathways towards hope for our fellow Virginians who are struggling with addiction, who are struggling now, right now. I'm proud that our bill authorized more than $900 million in the fight against the substance abuse crisis. And this is an example about getting serious about the challenges facing our communities, about tackling the underlying problems that hurt our communities, and about recognizing that for so many Virginians, and including those struggling with addiction, there is no time to delay. They don't have the ability to wait 10 or 20 or 30 years to see a change in the status quo. They, and their need for support and help and passion and grace and empathy and federal dollars to support them through their struggles, that's now that it's needed. And simply put, we can't risk more stories, more news reports, more heartbreaks that end with the words too little, too late. And when Dr. King talked about the fierce urgency of now at Riverside Church in New York, back in the late 1960s, it was in that moment of tremendous uncertainty. It was in a moment when global events, including a war on the other side of the world, were having direct impacts on the American people. And it was at a moment when discrimination, hate, and prejudice were on the rise, not on the run, on the streets of the United States of America. And at that April 1967 meeting, Dr. King warned about waiting too long to make tangible, real progress for our fellow Americans. He said, in this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. And so when I think about these words, the fierce urgency of now, and there is such a thing as being too late, makes me reflect on how our collective work, our successes or our failures at making change matter, and they matter now. And amid the pressure to make change and to deliver progress, I'm feeling very hopeful this morning. Seeing you all today, hearing about the successes of the NAACP branch in Fredericksburg, hearing about the commitment that community members have brought to this event in supporting it financially, supporting the work of the branch. I have hope that we will continue to have success, not failure, that we will have determination, not complacency. And together we will have the joy of knowing that an entire community of leaders is united in getting things done for our fellow Virginians from here in Fredericksburg to across the entire Commonwealth. I'm heartened by the strength of our young leaders from Mary Washington University and some of the other presenters who have done introductions today, hearing about the urgency of now, the urgency of creating change and impact and community on campus is something that for me as a legislator I view it as fulfilling that legacy, that wish, that those words of Dr. King saying that the fierce urgency of now exists and tomorrow is too late. And yesterday in Atlanta, Senator Raphael Warnock introduced President Biden at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta at the very same pulpit where Dr. King had once preached and where Dr. King had delivered sermons on Sunday mornings. Addressing a packed congregation and with the power of the church choir behind him, Senator Warnock spoke about that same push towards achieving the promise of our American ideals, the idea that America is a land that is and a land that is to come. He quoted Langston Hughes, who said that America is, quote, the land that never has been yet and yet must be, the land where every man is free. The land that never has been yet and yet must be, the land where every man is free. From the preachers to the poets to the politicians, the idea of needing to get to work today and not tomorrow is recognized as a way to strengthen, repair, and sustain our democracy. In the months, the weeks, the years ahead, I hope we can work together here in the Commonwealth to make that promise a reality for our fellow Virginians. Together, I know that we will protect voting rights. I know that the fierce urgency of now will push us to protect the civil rights of our fellow Virginians. And I know that we will succeed in protecting the very foundations of our democracy. I thank you for inviting me to join you at this beautiful event, to join in the community and to join you in honoring the life and the legacy of Dr. King. And although we are virtual, I look forward to seeing many of you at in-person events throughout our communities, whether in Fredericksburg or neighboring Stafford, Spotsylvania, King George, or beyond. Please do be in contact with my office if I may ever be of assistance to you, or if you have ideas of how we, my congressional team, my outreach team, my legislative team can truly embrace the urgency of now. While we may never grow to have the full platform that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had throughout his life, we remain called to the idea that our greatest platform for change in the world is in our hands, across our communities, and in service to others. It is an absolute honor to serve you all in the United States House of Representatives. I thank you for inviting me to join you all today and allowing me to reflect on this extraordinary speech, this extraordinary man who has given so much to our country. Thank you so much.